Well, you know I'm a big fan.
Thank you,
of
and thank you for coming. I can see some people I know and people I don't know, and it's really lovely. And someone said to me they bought a ticket to my launch, and I said, that's really strange, I'm not having a launch. And I realised they meant this event, so this is a very big moment for me, so I'm really grateful.
So congratulations on an excellent romp of a book. Murder on Line 1 is out in the wild. How does it feel? It
feels incredible. I want to give a big shout out to Liz and Martha at HarperCollins, but particularly Martha at the back as she's hiding. At the front, oh God. So can I tell this little story of how we met? I had a book agent called Care, and I said to Care, I really want to write a book that people want to read, because that's an original idea for me. And he said, well, let me introduce you to Martha Ashby. And I've always loved whodunnits, because I love Agatha Christie. I read my first Agatha when I was 11. And I said to Martha, what's the market doing? And she said, well, it's all cozy crime and murder. And I said, oh, okay, so how would you, if you were me, how would you write that? And she said, well, you choose a place you love. So I said, Sidmouth. And you choose an environment you know. So I said, a radio station. And then she said, you just have a murder. And that was, then a year and a bit later, I sent her that. So that's it.
This is a problem with interviewing a broadcaster. That's literally my first 6 questions answered. So I'm going to go to the pub now. Thanks, Jeremy. So for people who don't know what it's about, tell us, please, what can we expect plot-wise? What's going on?
Well, my theory about spoilers is that you can't have a spoiler in chapter 1. So I will say that you start with this revelation that you're following a radio presenter who's in his 40s and he's lost his son. And you only realize he's gone to shout for his son at a local football game, and he has to be told by other parents that his son has died because he can't come to terms with it. And because he can't come to terms with it, he can't really broadcast. And that's something that I think broadcasters really struggle with. Is there any amount of physical pain that would stop you broadcasting? If you lose your voice, you can't. But can you just broadcast through any emotional pain? And my theory is that the loss of a child will be the one thing you couldn't broadcast through. Because presenters generally are always present. So he's absent. He is the absent presenter. They've thrown him off the station, and then he realizes his listeners are being murdered. And he has to find out who's doing it. But to find out, he has to get back into the station, and that's going to be really difficult.
That's interesting about what you can broadcast through, because I broadcasted when I've been grieving before for family members, and we're able to compartmentalise it, aren't we, and to go on and perform, and it's actually quite healthy to be able to do that, because it's an escape for a couple of hours. But what you say about him losing his son, that's so true. There's no way you could just manage to push through that. That's so interesting.
Well, and I never mind people saying cozy crime, but I think it's tricky. Even with the Osmond books, there are things that happen in the Osmond books that are quite bloody.
Yeah.
And
there's quite a lot of gore in this, ladies and gentlemen. I do want to warn you about that.
Well, the two things I fear most are losing a child and having acid thrown in my face, and they both happen in this book. Sorry. And I've only done one interview like this before. Sorry, it was in Torquay, and I had to go to Torquay because
That's
they were...
That's okay, don't apologise. No, but to be interviewed by the people.
I didn't give any interesting answers in the interview. I was very careful not to. And I was going to Torquay because there was a statue of my queen, Agatha, being unveiled. And they have an Agatha Christie festival, and if you've been, every single person there knows everything about Agatha Christie. I knew much less. And the person who interviewed me, and this is quite a serious thing, sat down, and she introduced herself first, and she went through the books she'd written, and one of them was that she'd lost her son while he was at university. And I thought, oh, no, this is really, really tricky, because she's experienced in real life what my fictional character has experienced. But we had an incredible conversation about that loss, So it starts with the loss, and he basically is rebuilding himself. My hero, Edward, he finds that in his grief, he's got an incredible acuity, and it will give him the ability to solve a crime. And he can look into a situation and see the truth of it. And it's almost like a superpower.
Now, they do say, like you say, write what you know, write what you love. How much fun was it creating the older radio DJs? The production teams, and dare I say, the female station boss, because there happens to be a female station boss at BBC Radio 2.
Okay, this is really awkward.
Are you
I'm now
nervous about
scanning.
her
Do we
reading?
scan for our...
If
is our
Helen
boss-
Thomas is here in a large beard and a hat.
We have a brilliant boss at Radio 2. No, obviously not based on anyone. And but the classic thing that we experience all the time is that thing where the radio station audience gets a day older every day, and so do the presenters, and there's always someone in charge who thinks you've got to break that up somehow. And you do, because otherwise Radio 1 would still have... well, it would have a number
Me?
of criminals on it, but no, not you. Yes, no, it would have Tony Blackburn and Noel Edmonds and so on. So at some point, someone has to kick the system.
Yeah.
But we see this at Radio 2, and it's always very, very difficult, because the joy of Radio 2 is also that people. This will sound crazy. People die in harness. You know, we had a guy called Alan Keith. Do you remember him? He was 100. And he wrote a song. You remember this guy, and because you're nodding furiously. And he wrote a song called something like "A Nightingale Sings in Berkeley Square," which is about the end of the Second World War.
Oh, I love that song.
And I don't think you were on the station at the time. I overlapped with this guy, and there was a whole protocol. If Alan died while broadcasting, they had to have a series of managers had to be notified one at a time. And one day the producer came in, and he was slumped forwards with his head on the desk, and they started ringing everyone, and they put, the red lights going, and it turned out he was looking for his pencil. So we have had that the joyful thing of having older people, and then the painful thing of losing people like Terry, Steve Wright, Johnny Walker's funeral I was at the other day. Something wonderful about having the longevity, and the lift door opens and out comes Tony Blackburn, who was the first voice on Radio 1.
I mean, he's going to outlast all of us, isn't he? He's a miracle.
He is. He's amazing. And hello, Jerry, how are you? All right. And I said, we're doing, when he does the bank holiday show, he does the one after me, and my show is, can be quite serious. We're doing something on alcoholism, and he comes in and I say, okay, Tony, we just done an item on alcoholism. I'll just ask you what you're doing. And he comes on and he says, okay, I'll give you a couple of jokes about alcohol. No, please don't do that. So, yeah, it's a wonderful thing, but you always sense the friction with the managers, and that's true, that is in the book. They're trying to get rid of the older presenters who are known as the farmers on my station, and they are very angry all the time.
They're brilliant. They're brilliant characters. Talking about dying doing what you love, how much research did you do when it came to that brilliant kite surfing scene? Because it's quite an extreme sport. Did you get in the water at any point?
No, I think this is where... the credit to the person who read my book through, whose name was the genius who read it, who does the copy editing.
Yeah.
Because I knew exactly what I wanted to describe, which is somebody on the sea who's on a sort of board with a kite.
Yes.
And I got the wrong word, and I called it something like surf waving or something. And they said, that's not a sport. So there was virtually no research, except that I go to Sidmouth the whole time. I was there this weekend. And once again, they were in the sea, and I've always thought I really want to do that.
I mean, it's incredible. They fly like 20
know how they
metres
do it.
in the air. It looks very dangerous. I'm quite glad you didn't do it, because you did tumble off your penny farthing. I think that's quite as extreme as we want you to go, Jeremy.
Well, I did. Okay, so just to have full disclosure, I did, for whatever crazy reason, buy a penny farthing shortly before they became popular. Can I point that out? And so before COVID, they did come back in a big way, because there are now about a dozen people cycling them in London. And there's a guy called Roger in Stockport who supplies penny farthings. And I had seen somebody riding one down Chiswick High Road about, I was on Strictly at the time, so this dates it was 2015, and I was turning 50. And this guy came past me, and he had a very serious expression. I thought, what I want to do is I want to ride a penny farthing, but I want to be smiling when I ride it. Then I want to look serious, like I'm trying not to fall off. So I always smile when I ride it. It was very difficult to learn. Some people had to take me out to the velodrome in Herne Hill. They showed me the different wheel sizes. I won't get into details here, but it's a 56-inch wheel, everyone, okay?
Woo.
You know what I'm saying? And then the inevitable happened, which is that I had the accident that rendered the penny farthing extinct, which is the trouble is your center of gravity is right over the front wheel. Your head is 9 foot in the air. I got cocky. I waved to a nice young family in Chiswick who were passing, and I then thought, I'm going to shortcut across Duke's Meadows, if you know it, And I didn't realize that the unwritten rule of penny farthings is never ride on grass, because you can't see the surface. And if you hit a divot, as I did, you will just stop. And I did. And I went over for the first time in my life, I was knocked out. And I woke up, and of course, being Chiswick, there were 2 doctors had seen it. So I thought I was seeing double. But they then, I couldn't even, I came to A&E, and it was sort of COVID-y, and I had to go in on my own, and the woman at the reception at A&E, so there's got to be a more hostile word for it, but she said, "What's your name?" And I kind of got my name, and "What's your address?" And I said, "I think it's London somewhere." And I said, "Can I bring my wife in? She's parked outside." And she said, "No, we can't have anyone else in. Just have another go at your address." And then she said, and what happened to you? And I said, "I fell off a penny farthing." And she said, "Right, we're going to need to see your wife, actually." And then when I was in there, they kept sending loads of people in to see me, who would all go, "Are you the man who fell off the penny?" like that, as a curiosity. And then there was a headline, Jeremy Vine rushed to A&E after fall off penny farthing, and Greg James then reads it out as the funniest story of the day. So,
of course.
But I don't go on grass anymore. I do still ride it every week.
Yeah, I saw you going over the newly reopened, is it Hammersmith Bridge?
Yeah, I did. The council asked me to go over the new bridge, and hilariously, Hammersmith Council said, "We're reopening the bridge. Will you ride your penny farthing across, but we're trying to keep it low profile?" I thought, quite understand how that works.
Yeah, you going across going, "Hello."
It's a soft
everybody.
launch.
It was
yeah.
great. So let's talk about Sidmouth, a place close to your heart where the book is set. Why did this coastal town provide the perfect backdrop? And what is your sudden beef with Appledore? Because are they annoyed that it's not set in Appledore, where you curate the annual
I do. I have a big
festival?
North Devon thing in Appledore,
Yes.
but we have basically my wife's. I got married to the lovely Rachel in 2002, and her family are from Sidmouth area, and therefore we have this amazing thing where if you go to the same place every year with your kids, and they're now 18 and 21, incredibly, but every year we go to the Devon coast, and if you know Sidmouth, it is a proper town. It's not just chintzy, but the seafront also looks like it's the set to an Agatha Christie. And, oh, God, I keep mentioning Agatha Christie. I can't, that's 3 times now. And I just thought I've got to set it there. But I was worried I'd be run out of town, because there's always a moment, any place in Britain gets mentioned on my show. And with Sidmouth, it was that they had a so-called fatberg. I don't know if you saw this story, but they had a massive amount of wet wipes and fat and dental floss trapped in their sewer. And I know I'm not supposed to express views, but I was appalled that this had all been built up. And I said it should be brought out of the sewer. It's the size of 2 double-decker buses, right? It was massive. It should be brought out and placed in the centre of the town, so people stop throwing dental floss away. And I thought, this is not going to endear me. So I then said, actually, that was just a joke, and we can move on.
When you're trying to create all these amazing characters, and when they're all, when it's in a coastal town like that, what does it add? Does it become, a character itself? Does it, what's going on there? What does it add?
I think I don't know how many of us actually live in the Big Smoke in London. London is so atypical, and it's such a bad example of everything. And your brilliant books are set elsewhere. I think once you go outside, when you discover this country, whether you're in Devon or Cumbria or Edinburgh or somewhere out of London is weird, and Devon is. There's just this glorious, I suppose it's an old-fashioned Englishness about it. I hate to say it, but it just feels like you're walking around the 1970s, for better or worse. And the first, when I started to go down there, and I was married to Rachel and stuff, and I remember going down, and I was in a pub, and we were near the fire, and I said to the pub landlord, do you mind turning the fire down a bit? And he said, "You're not from round here, are you?" Because obviously it was a real fire. I just assumed all fires had a switch on them. So I realised I said to Rachel, I'm going to have to be more rural, So that's been my real guiding ambition.
Just from that bit of accent there, because I know that you do enjoy doing accents occasionally on the radio as well. Have you done the audiobook? Have you finished it? And are there a lot of accents in it? Because obviously the vast majority of your characters are from Devon. So how have you got round that?
Well, you raise a very interesting point. Because
are you going to get cancelled by Devon? Which would be really cruel?
I think it's okay to do a Devon accent, but I don't know. I'll find out. We do actually have a listener called Colin there's a gentleman looking at me now who's done the full, that's my accent, and I'm furious. He's not buying, I can see you, sir, he's not buying the book. He will not break a smile. Oh, my God. Okay, so I think Devon's okay. This audiobook thing is vexed, let me tell you. Clearly, you cannot do a number of accents. This is, I'm making a serious...
I had a Scottish Potter in my first
novel. You could do a Scottish Potter.
Well, I should have got you in to do it.
I wasn't. Am I going to get cancelled now? Because I've got a Scottish character in my...
Yes.
When you write so I've not done an audiobook before, and I suddenly realised you can write yourself into a hell of a lot of trouble.
Yes.
I mean, let's not even go into some of the difficulties here, but I've got a character who's... was a Geordie who was adopted by a Scottish vicar and then moved down to Devon. Now, how the hell do I do that? And when I wrote it, I never thought this is going to be a problem. And... yeah, essentially, I mean, in all seriousness, you can't do accents of countries that this country's colonized, for example. That's kind of stands to reason. And that rules out a hell of a lot of accents. You probably can't do a lot of... you can do American, I think.
So what have you done? I can't wait to hear it.
I did my character who's Scottish talks. But the trouble is that my Scottish accent just sounds like Sean Connery.
It really does.
So it doesn't really suit a 26-year-old young woman. So she talks, so she's like, I'll have 6 stacks, please. Yes. The other thing about an audiobook, so interesting. It was such a revelation because I sat and it was down the road from here. And I sit in a studio and you could basically, in a sitting, I think you can do 100 pages, but that's a lot. And that would take, I think, maybe 4 or 5 hours. So in maybe 3 or 4 sittings, you can do a book. But you just have, it's like being not Guantanamo Bay, but you're kind of in Stockholm Syndrome, where you're sort of, your prisoner and your jailer is the brilliant producer who's doing it. And the producer,
like the Chiswick version of Guantanamo Bay, like with the doctors.
So whatever the modern Trump equivalent is to that. But anyway, so Lucy was doing the recording. And what I noticed with Lucy was, and I don't know if you had this with yours, is that there are moments when they really focus on what you're recording. And you realize, and this is a great tip, I suddenly realized, and this is just so obvious, action sequences, like let's say you have a chase and someone goes from one place to another and then they run out of the car and then up through the bill. Suddenly Lucy's like, what? And then I say, can we just break for a cup of tea? No, you can't break. I want to hear the next bit. And I suddenly thought, oh, this is a great little bit of research here, is when the producer of the audiobook starts listening, then you know you're writing something interesting. So the next book I'm writing has like 100 pages of unbroken action sequence because I'm just trying to keep Lucy interested.
Okay, it's going to be Die Hard.
Yeah, that's right.
7 by you. Okay. You did mention your lovely wife Rachel and your daughters Martha and Anna, who were 3 brilliant, bright women at home. Does that help having them there when you are writing female characters yourself, which is a skill? And you have it, I think, especially Kim, who is quite sarcastic and has some sharply withering put-downs for our anti-hero Edward. Do you think that helps that your daughters and wife are sarcastic with you? And
yes, for sure. I mean, I just we were in Sidmouth at the weekend, as I mentioned. I normally film things for my Channel 5 show if something... I've got a couple of the producers here, by the way, Sophia and Harriet at the back. I can see any others here from the squad? Oh, hi. Oh, Sarah. Brilliant. Oh, and Ella. Fantastic. And it's so nice. I didn't know they were coming. Well, they know this, that we have to film stuff for the show the next day. So they say there's a part of the show at about 10:30 where we sort of have an ad break, and then I say, you never guess what happened to me. And this you'll never guess what happened to me slot is just insatiable. You know, like tomorrow I'll say you'll never guess what happened to me. I was interviewed by Sara and I was with all these lovely people. And so at the weekend I did this thing about being in a car park in Devon and having to pay by app. And it's a classic thing where you can't do contactless because that's not modern enough. You obviously can't pay cash because cash doesn't exist anymore. So and we couldn't get the app to work because we hadn't got a signal. And so I did a little, and I'm standing here, my family, Martha, Anna, Rachel, it's 15 minutes now, and then here's the machine, and it's not working, and we could be here for hours, and then my daughter just goes, shut up. So that's my role in the pecking order. So so Martha's 21, she's studying English at university, and Anna is 18 and doing her A-levels, and it's, a joyful thing to be a dad.
No,
I remember, by the way, Martha, it was Anna when I said to her, isn't it amazing, it's years ago, isn't it amazing, Anna, you're 4 tomorrow? And she said, yes, Daddy, I was surprised as well.
Oh.
I know.
Best-selling author C.L. Taylor has called the characters in the book engaging and eccentric. We have garden centre manager Kenneth Scomes, Julius Cadell and his daughter Shaggy.
Oh, yes, okay, yeah.
And the twins Angela and Olive. You have an eye for the quirky. Just so much is this inspired by some of the callers to your BBC Radio 2 show every day.
Well,
do you have favourites? Do you have regulars? I am a bit of a mega fan. I do text, don't I? Sometimes I will message you going, that one is for the roundup of the year when you do your special shows towards the end of the year. There's some calls sometimes that it's just absolute radio gold, and you are brilliant with people. You're brilliant with with politicians and all that. So you're great at all that. But I think your real genius and your real skill is when you can be really empathetic to callers, and also when you can just very lightly take the piss as well.
Well, it's funny because the producers from the TV show, the Channel 5 show is very similar to the radio show, except that you're on TV. So they've worked out that it's a very good form of TV to just have callers. But obviously the design fault in that is, what does the presenter do? So my job is basically to stare at the camera, pulling a series of faces. I mean, that's literally what should be on my passport. What do you do for a living? The callers on Radio 2, since I've been there for now 20, I shouldn't say how many years, should I? Because they'll get rid of me.
Yeah.
No, so it's like only 5 or 6 years. But it's because Helen could be here. It's the joyful thing. We don't really have regulars. Somebody asked me yesterday, do you have regulars? We don't really, but we've had the odd caller who we've realised is just gold. And we had a woman called Jean Neal who died, and we had like a full Radio 2 obituary for her when she died because she was so important to the show. Jean Neal from Rotherham would just ring up and say, the thing I don't understand is, and it would just be bang on. And we said to her, look, why don't you, one day we're going to explain the economy and in a way that Jean Neal can understand what the hell is going on. And Simon Jack, the business editor, will come in and explain to Jean Neal, and she'll ask him questions, And so he gave, Simon Jack's a lovely guy, he came and did a brilliant explanation of everything that's going wrong and everything, and then he said, and right, that's it, and Jean, what questions have you got? And she said, well, I've only really got one question. If you're so clever, why aren't you rich? This is brilliant. So it's Frank in Kidderminster who rang after there was a massive hack of the NHS, and he says the only way to sort this out is to go back to pen and paper. Because the Russians will not be able to hack a Post-it note. And it's just bang on. There's a massive... listeners calling for the end of digital is a really big thing. I mean, my mum won't do internet banking or anything. And we've got, so many of these... we had a panel of mums to try to give, decide sentences for serious criminals, because judges so often seem to get it wrong. And these mums are inventive. They keep saying when the worst crimes come up, that serious criminals should be, and I quote, sorry about this, forced to wipe the bums of elderly people in old people's homes. That's what they keep saying. And then we then get a complaint from an old people's home who said that our residents do not want to be in such close contact with hardened criminals and do not believe that any part of their body should be used to punish crime. We did a thing on, sorry, you started me now, but I mean...
No, I just always love your generic accent that you do for people.
The survey that said people in cul-de-sacs tend to be heavier than average, overweight. Eddie from Somerset rings, this research cannot be true. I live on a main road and I'm fat. So, and just recently I realised that I've hit the 40,000th call on Radio 2.
Wow.
Because I did a calculation. But before, when I hit the 20, I got a bit obsessed with this thing. I was about to hit 25,000 because it was a way of working it out, but calls per day. And I was thinking, I need to the BBC won't notice. There's not going to be any bunting or anything. But at least for myself, I could just say, 24,997, 24,998. And I'm thinking, okay, it's the next but one call. So we're 24,999. And then I don't say to the guy, it's just for me. I say, we've now got Stephen in Hertfordshire is ringing. And the item was Martin Lewis, ways of borrowing money if your bank won't lend to you. Right? So, Stephen, what's your question for Martin Lewis on how you borrow money if the bank won't lend to you? And he just laughs and shouts, sperm bank, and hangs up. And I think, okay, great. That's my 25,000th call. So I think now I'm heading for 40,000. I'm not going to do any kind of, I'm going to keep it vague in case that happens again.
Just as a tiny sidebar for All Requests Friday, when I did have the call, that it really tickled you, didn't it? Because I had the caller, which was very bad, 'cause it's live radio and lots of kids listening on a Friday. And a caller rang up and called the then health secretary, Matt Hancock, the C word, live on radio, which I had to deal with an All Request Friday, which was the world slowed for a split second. And because it's All Request Friday, every link is a different caller, and then they have chosen a tune. So you've only got one song loaded in, so otherwise you've got silence. And so I did all the right protocol, which was sort of invented because of the time Ali G said mother on Radio 1, which was... So 20 years later, the Matt Hancock incident happens, and I sort of do the whole thing of like, I've had to cut you off now. There are children listening. I'm so sorry about that language. This is a live radio show. I've cut the person off now. And then I just had to still play the person's song. I played Queen, Don't Stop Me Now, and you were like, what do they have to say for them not to get a song played on Radio 2? I was like, there's no choice. There's nothing we could do.
We had actually, while we're talking about callers, we don't get hoaxed very often. But we had this caller once. It was incredible. He rang during an item about kleptomania. And so the question was, are you somebody who can't stop stealing? And he said, I'm in Lancashire, and I'm not going to do my voice. I'm going to do a different voice now. And I have, over the years, stolen a lot of coats from pubs. And I started with a coat, and I never wanted to look in the wallets or anything like that. I'm not interested in the money. But I got the coat, and I just kept it. It was a lovely coat. He described it in great detail. It was a Barber jacket. And he said, I then stole another one. And I'm now 8 or 9 years on, and I've stolen 58 coats. I've got them in a lockup. They're all perfectly catalogued. They've all got their wallets in them, and I want to start giving them back. And I need advice on how to do this. And listeners were really saying that this is wonderful that you're giving them back. And then we actually then had him on a second time to talk about this process of how could he leave them in the same pubs and everything. And then afterwards, we thought it was an amazing item. And then there was a separate caller about 6 months later who had a bat infestation in his roof. And he said that you can't move the bats because of bat protection. And their droppings were so heavy that the house was about to collapse, and his wife had left him. And so what should he do? And we had a bat expert in who said, well, whatever happens, do not shoo them, do not move them, do not upset them. And he says, you mean I'll have to my whole house might fall down and I can't even move the bats? It's ridiculous. So anyway, we did that. And then someone in this office said, yeah, there's something weird about that, but we left it. And then the third one was a guy, and this was crazy. He said we were talking about benefit fraud. He said he looked after a man who couldn't see, speak or hear, and was completely immobile and could only communicate by moving one eyelid. And then he'd left that job. He'd gone on holiday to Spain. He'd been on the beach, and the guy had come surfing towards him, probably kite surfing, and the same guy, right? And he said, that's benefit fraud right there. And afterwards the editor said, that is crazy. That cannot. And we looked up the guy's number, and we thought, this obviously we must not have him on again. Has he called before? And he called the bats and the coats. So coats, bats, and Surfer Man, the Salvador Dali of hoaxers. I miss him.
Yeah.
It was about 15 years ago, and we've tightened up procedures, obviously, in case the boss is in.
Leslie's just got a new phone, maybe. It could be, yeah. You never know. We're going to move on. We are talking about the book this evening. Are we going to hear more from Edward Temis? Are there going to be more books? Is this a character that you've created now that you are going to write about more?
Yes, and indeed I have actually finished a second book, so I'm one behind you, Sarah.
Very nice.
But so I think this trio of Edward, his on-off girlfriend Kim, who's had her own difficulties in life, and this crazy Geordie Scottish Devon who talks like Sean Connery, they can be an item, and they are, when they come together, this triad are brilliant at solving things.
I thought you were going to say it's murder. Do you remember that from Heart to Heart when they get together? No.
So I'm very excited, and I get up every morning and I write 400 words. And so I've always loved writing though. I don't know about you, whether you're the same, but something about writing. I know it's old-fashioned, but here we are surrounded in a wonderful bookshop. Isn't it great? Paper. And I think radio, here we are, two very modern people, and we're working on a medium which is so old-fashioned, and it's survived the internet avalanche. And I'm convinced that books have as well. I'm so excited by it. The things that have somehow survived the tsunami of digital, the horrible digital world.
Well, speaking of which, we are going to take you back now to the Coventry Evening Telegraph, where you cut your teeth, where you learned how to write, how to be a journalist. Junior reporter there. Valuable lessons. Any that you remember?
Yeah, I mean, it was honestly 75% of everything I know comes from the Coventry Evening Telegraph. And I should give a shout out, because sometimes occasionally I mention it and people say, yeah, and they totally understand, because they worked on a regional newspaper or a local newspaper. And it was manual typewriters. It was 1986. They had 85 journalists, never mind the print setters, and the person who ran the Coventry Evening Telegraph lottery had his own office with a door. Can you imagine? And a sign saying lottery manager, and they had a reception, and it occupied 4 floors of this massive building in Coventry, which with this kind of Frankenstein Gothic font saying Coventry Evening Telegraph, which spoke of 1,000 years of history and 1,000 more to come. And I didn't see it coming, the thing that killed them. They've gone from 85 journalists to 6, and they're a website now, and I don't know where the presses are. They're probably in a separate city. They probably have to supply the copy the day before. I don't even know if they're in print anymore. So I feel very grateful that I saw that, and I feel very stupid that I missed that when they said, oh, good news, we're having computers arrive. We're going to be able to do stuff on computers, and we're going to probably print in color. And instead of having 80,000 readers a day, that's how many issues they sold every day, we may even sell 100,000. In fact, actually, the disaster was that the readers got the computers as well, and they went elsewhere for their news, and that was curtains. But it was the best place. On my very first day, I was just out of Durham University. I mean, they were falling over themselves to employ people. They employed me as a trainee. They had 3 trainees. I had not even been to Coventry before. They were begging for trainees to join them. That's how different it was. The very first day I had to go down to Coventry railway station to interview a group of students dressed as bears who were raising money for the local hospital. And I went with this notebook and I filled it with, what are your names? How old are you? I even asked some of them their height. Which hospital? Why are you raising the money? I thought, okay, and I came back to this terrifying, the deputy news editor, Jeff Grimmer, and he said, why were they dressed as bears? And I said, I don't know. And he sent me back down to the railway station to ask them. And the funny thing was, they didn't know either. So yeah, I learned so many lessons there. It's such a great place, and hot metal. You walk past the printing press on your way to collect your bicycle, and you could almost smell your story coming off. So I think it was lucky, but I also think, how did I not spot that the internet was going to be a thing? Because while I was doing that, Bill Gates was wearing very thick glasses and doing Microsoft.
Yeah. I'm going to leapfrog about a bit, so bear with your career. 1997 to 2000, you were the BBC's Africa correspondent, based in Johannesburg, I believe.
Yes.
It is feeling a little bit, this is your life. I feel like I should have a red book. What are your most fond memories of the place and the people? I know you made a lot of friends there.
Well, I was on Westminster before for the BBC, and I was a kind of political correspondent, so my whole sort of work was basically just looking at political stories coming off the fax machine and thinking that was what was important. And then they said, we think Blair won the election, and I basically thought there's not going to be any more politics, because politics is what happens inside parties, not between them. And so the BBC, in its wisdom, because occasionally it has rational moments, said, we think you should go and do something real, and you should go somewhere you've never been, and you should, really see the world. And it was a brilliant thing for me to go to be based in Johannesburg. And the funny thing was, I traveled in 18 African countries in 3 years. So we'd go all over. You'd never go anywhere where a tourist was. You'd only ever do, so it was kind of a trail of disaster, sadly, lots of crazy stuff, and Zimbabwe and Eritrea and Angola and Namibia, etc. And the thing that I remember most clearly was the maid. And we had this, strange to say, the BBC had a maid called Paulina. And she was this lovely South African, poor, rather illiterate black woman who'd worked for the BBC for 30 years. And she's still alive, still in touch with her. And she, okay, this is the thing that I always remember from being in South Africa, and it's the craziest thing that it all comes back to the maid. But she had, the one thing in her life she loved was her son, Matthias. And he was her sister's son, and she died of cancer. And she was so it was me, and she lived on the property, and she's the BBC's maid, and I don't know, I paid for her privately or whatever, and she's just a big part of everything. And she'd always go, are you going to Africa, when I was leaving? Because for her, it's like Britain and Europe. South Africa was not part of Africa. And then one day she rang me, and for the first time ever, she was in tears, and she said, Matthias is dead. And her son and she'd got nothing anyway, and her son had died in a car crash, which is the classic way of dying in South Africa. Is terrible traffic, everything. And she said, Paulina said, so this is so funny, I was thinking about this today because it really came back to me. She said, I've got to speak at the funeral, and would you be able to write the speech for me? And so I said, well, and of course I think, well, yeah, of course I can, because I'm a professional writer and I wear a suit and tie on the BBC, and I've got a computer and I'll fire it up and I'll write it and you can check it and everything. And I didn't realize how arrogant was I that actually I was just going to type what she said. So I sat at the computer with her, and she said off the top of her head, this speech I've still got, that was the most powerful thing I've ever written on my computer, and it wasn't me who wrote it. And the thing I remember most clearly was she said, I will miss Matthias terribly because he was always calling me mother, and no one will call me mother anymore. And as I typed it, I thought, why did I ever think that I could do better than this? And it taught me such a lesson, which is that the really powerful things are things that are true and come from the heart. And the amazing thing about working in Africa was you'd often interview people who'd never seen a microphone before, they'd never been on the radio before, and everything you did was a scoop. And then you couldn't get it on the bloody news because they were running something about, Blair has sneezed or whatever. And you come back with such an anger about the news, and why isn't the Congo on the news when 1 million people have died there? And for the rest of your life, you're just raging about the news. It's a very, very good thing to do.
No, we're good friends, but I didn't know that you'd reported on so many wars and civil wars, on the Angolan Civil War and Eritrean and Ethiopian War. Were you ever in danger for your life? Was there a moment where you thought, I'm pushing my luck here? And I know it was before your girls arrived and stuff. I imagine you wouldn't want to do that once you're a father, do that kind of job.
Yeah, it was a strange. I mean, we did a thing where they said this is when before the BBC actually put accountants into the sort of line between news commissioning and reporting. So the news commissioners in London would just say, they'd see a wire and it said that war has broken out between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Can you go there? So we go in this crazy journey where we go to Sudan and then Kenya, and then we go into Asmara in Eritrea, and we just say, take us to the front line. Right? So, and we're driving, and then we end up, and this was not very dangerous because there was a piece of string across the road, and we said, well, I don't know why we stopped here. And then this guy says, if you drive on, we're going to shoot you. So we think, well, I don't know whether we should drive on or not really. I think we've got better turn back. I think, how uncool is that? We've been stopped by a piece of string, We have to ring London and say we can't get any further because there's a piece of string across the road. So a lot of the time, you never really found the story. And actually, there was a book that came out while I was out there called You Should Have Been Here Yesterday. And you did find, wherever you went, you were a day late. You're constantly told you should have been here yesterday. And I thought once, I'm going to write a book or do a talk on it. And I found there were 4 books called You Should Have Been Here Yesterday, because all journalists, that's all they ever get told. But yeah, in the end, the most dangerous thing I ever did was actually when I was very young and I was on the Today program, and it was like I was 23, 24, and and this is one of these crazy things. They would never allow this now, but they just used to send people, and to the point where they said there's at the time the former Yugoslavia was falling apart. Serbia then was trying to get Slovenia not to go independent. The Slovenes were kind of cool and sexy, and the Serbs all like wearing uniforms, so they were not going to get on. And the Serbs had sent tanks into Slovenia, and it was quite a bad scene. And I was told to go. I didn't have a passport. I always remember age 23, but the editor bollocking me for not having brought my passport into the office, which I think now, looking back, was just an amazing thing. You've got to bring your passport because you've got to be able to go straight to Heathrow. What sort of career did you think you were starting here? Jeremy Vine. And so I get my passport, I go, and I then, actually funny, the Serbian tanks have gone round in a circle. They come out of Slovenia, they didn't fancy it. They go back to Serbia, and I say, this war is over, it only lasted a day. It turned out to go on for 5 or 6 years. But while I was there was then an attack in Croatia. So I drove. I mean, I still can't believe I did this, but I thought I'm going to drive through Croatia into Serbia. And that route was the front line. And I drove as a 23-year-old in the night in this hire car between Croatia and Serbia in the dark. And I just suddenly thought, I'm going to die here because I definitely know this car's going to be fired on. And I got to Serbia, amazing. I got the other side, and I got then arrested by the Serbs. They sent me back the other way. I talked to somebody about it years later, and he just said, you're lucky to be alive. And the next day, having not learned my lesson, I then went out with these freelance reporters, and they wanted to, again, find the front line. There's got to be a warning here as a red flag. If someone says we're going to find the front line, it's a bad idea. So they went across this field, and we came under fire. And I had my tape recorder running. I still got the clip. We really, really came under fire to the point where a bullet passed my head so close that you could hear it go pew, like that. And I thought to myself, I don't know if this is my scene doing this. I think when You're like,
I'd rather play Fleetwood Mac on Radio 2.
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, I did. There was a part of me that was exhilarated. I went back to the hotel and I thought, wow, someone has fired at me and missed. But you can't do that very often. And I stood in front of the hotel mirror. Bear in mind, I was only 23. I had this nosebleed right there and then. This must be a stress thing or something. And I remember thinking, I've now shed blood for the BBC, and I had this heroic thought. And now I look at the likes of Jeremy Bowen. How has he done that for so long? Because I think at some point the danger, or you almost become immune to it. So it was my taste of doing it. I didn't run away from it, but I just thought, I'm not sure I could do that for a long time. Okay. So I still have that clip. I still have that bullet on my phone. I've got the clip. It's a real reminder of being lucky, actually, being very, very lucky.
What were you more nervous about? Interviewing Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe in 1999, or your cha-cha-cha on Strictly 2015, your very first dance with Karen?
It's so funny, blokes and dancing. Because definitely the cha-cha-cha. The great Karen Hauer on Strictly was my teacher. And this will sound crazy, but I had such a I never danced before, and she showed me the moves, and I thought, okay, fine. Well, I mean, obviously, I'm going to get 40. I mean, I can't see the problem here, So I do, and I now see the dance. Now I understand dancing. It's not that I can dance now, but I understand what good dancing is and what bad dancing is, and I understand that I was doing bad dancing. But at the time, I didn't know the difference. And so I did this cha-cha-cha, which she'd been through, and I could see her having a nervous breakdown because I couldn't even move my hips, And I looked at the judges afterwards, and the place was going crazy, which I thought was a good sign. My brother actually afterwards said to me, I was trying to work out who the comedy act this year was, and until you danced, I didn't, I couldn't tell. And the judges, and then Craig Revel Horwood had this expression like someone had died. I mean, he actually looked angry. And then they started putting up 2s and 3s, and I thought, oh no. Okay, now I understand. That was not a dance. And it's just that bloke thing of, if I put my arm out there, and I put my arm out there, and I finish on time, and I start on time, surely I'll win. And we had Ewan Thomas, the sprinter, and he was knocked out in the first week because he just basically viewed a waltz as something you have to do as fast as possible. So he went round the room so fast. And then Len Goodman was actually angry. Len Goodman said, "I don't know what that was." And we were consoling each other. So we just both said, we were on the balcony, and then Helen George, the actress, did this incredible waltz with Aliash, and we just said, bloody hell, we're in trouble here, you know.
And was it Craig or the late great Len who said, wasn't it that you looked like a stork that had been hit by lightning?
Yes, it was Craig, yeah. And I remember Craig, after it, it's funny, it gives adults permission to be children strictly. It's incredible. You should do it, by the way. You'd be amazing.
I did the Christmas one years ago. I did a very slow waltz to a very slow Elvis song, and I genuinely looked like my dad dragging a disgruntled heifer around a cattle sale ring. It was terrible.
But when it was it's very grey. You get knocked out. You funnily enough, it's such a BBC thing. You've promised your friend you can come the next week, and the strictly people say, "No, you've been knocked out. You can't bring you haven't got any tickets. What sort of show do you think we're running here? You know, why would you have tickets if you've been knocked out?" So it all goes grey, and I'm cycling into Radio 2, and it's grey and wet, and it's raining, and I'm cycling down New Cavendish Street, and a black cab pulls out of a side road without looking, usual thing, and I said, "Look, if you could just look, it is my right of way here." And he said, you should be more careful with your bicycle, mate. Like that. So I can't be bothered, you know. So, and as I cycle off, I hear him shout, "And you're dancing shit as well."
No, we're nearly out of time. There's so much I could talk to you about. One thing that when I was sitting there this morning, I was thinking I've got to ask him because it's really cool as a journalist. I don't know if you do want to be, write in the story yourself, but in 2010, you were in the real centre of a huge political moment with then Prime Minister Gordon Brown.
Oh, yeah.
When he was caught on mic referring to a Labour supporter as that bigoted woman, you broke the news to him that he'd been caught on mic saying that on your live Radio 2 show. What was that like, being right in the middle of that? And as a journalist, it was obvious, it must have been great, I imagine. As a human, did you feel a little bit bad for him? Because I watched the clip on YouTube today where you play him back to him, and he just drops his head into his hands like, Jesus, the worst day ever.
So it was a very weird thing. The background to it was, I was interviewing Gordon Brown in the 2010 election. Normally, prime ministers come in, it's a sort of constitutional thing, they come into Radio 2 and we do an interview. And we'd been told that he'd be down the line from Manchester. And we were kind of cheesed off about it. And we said, can we at least have a camera so we can see him? And they said, absolutely no cameras at all in the studio. You know, so it's unsatisfactory from our point of view because interviewing is hand-to-hand combat. And he'd been out and about. We were told he couldn't come into the studio because he would be out and about, I quote, out and about in Rochdale giving voters a good feeling. And so the interview starts, and it's a classic. I mean, if you remember back to 2010, we're in the back of the banking crisis, so it's all about why didn't you regulate the banks? And he's doing his whole, banks were regulated under a new system I had developed, like that, and it just kept droning on like my character in my book now. And then the editor says to me, this guy called Phil Jones, says to me in my headphones, "He's been rude to a pensioner in Rochdale. I'll get the details." And I'm thinking, well, this is tricky because I don't know anything about this. Can I just say, I gather you've been... I don't think I can. So I ignore him. And then the editor says, he called her a bigoted woman. So I think, okay, now I've got enough for a question. So I say, we're just getting word that you've called a pensioner in Rochdale a bigoted woman. Is that what you said? And as I say it, Sarah's absolutely right. The tape of it, incredibly, sort of drops into the tape deck in front of me. And he says, "Well, if it is true, I certainly would not want to call anybody that." And I said, "Well, hang on a minute, we can hear it." So I press it, and he doesn't even know it exists. But of course, what's happened is he's worn his microphone into the car, and the Sky camera is still recording, so they've caught it. and I play this excruciating thing where he's bollocking his aides and saying she was just a sort of a bigoted woman. Whose fault was that? That was Sue, was it? It was a terrible thing. And then the microphone goes out of range, and then I can hear he's completely winded. He's just had the stuffing knocked out of him. And I come out after the interview and I say, and I don't take any pleasure in it. Obviously, it's not. It's a terrible thing. So I sound like Trump. It's a terrible thing. It's just so bad.
Quite good.
But I come out to the editor afterwards and I say, God, that was an incredible moment of radio, Phil. He said, no, it wasn't radio. He said it was television. He said, as soon as you use the phrase pensioner Rochdale, they've got 4 screens in the studio. They all cut to a live shot of Gordon Brown. And then when you said bigoted woman, he goes forward with his head in his hand like he's been shot. And, the picture, of course, became massive, and it was, in a way, summed up Labour's loss of power after 13 years. Was this moment of Gordon Brown with his head in his hands. But I could never work out how, given that they'd said no cameras, how there was a camera in the studio. It's so mysterious because it was in Manchester, and how did the BBC then cut to it live? And it's just such a mystery. And about a week later, just before the general election, I was doing the election graphics with Dimbleby and co. And a guy came round, and he was introduced to me as, I think, Deputy Head of Premises Operations Facilities Management. And I said to him, can you explain to me how we had a camera in the studio when they'd expressly said no cameras, and then we put it live? Because I still don't know. And he said, oh, yeah, that's a rule in the BBC that BBC premises, what we call BBC premises filming, is allowed at all times and in all circumstances, no matter who is involved. I said, really? Is that how long has that been a rule? He said, about 7 days. So they found a new rule for me, which is good.
When you're talking Westminster Reporter, the Today programme, your own show on Radio 2, you're going to do a political thriller at some point. I know.
I don't know if politics is.
You'd be so good at it.
I'm so obsessed with politics, but it's duller than it was. I can still remember the Thatcher cabinet. Has anyone else got that problem? The Nicholas Ridley was arts, and the sports minister was Neil McFarlane, and Paul Shannon was the trade and industry.
I just remember spitting image more than the actual cabinet.
Heseltine, I don't know. It's staple. I can't even. I know the education secretary is Bridget Phillipson, but I start to struggle. And of course, it's all dominated now by personalities. And we just did a moment of Trump there because to do my Channel 5 show, we got to have a Trump impression because he's dominating everything now. I think I am. And Farage and Boris, and we've moved into that era now. So so the functionary end of it, the sort of who's the deputy education secretary is just not really that interesting.
Okay, well, before we go to audience questions, before you go and sign lots of your lovely books, I want to say you turn 60 soon.
Sara, you weren't supposed to mention that. You've only just turned 49, and I know that because I was at your party. So
yeah, no, I'm now 50. The party was because you came to my 49th.
That was a year ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I am. It's true. I'm 60.
60 soon.
Yeah. Next
Bring
month.
on the cake. No. I'm joking. So new chapters and all that. You're very busy. You're doing more writing. You've got your TV. You've got your radio. You've got winding people up on Twitter with your cycling tweets.
I brought this in for you because I thought I was showing it to my lovely Martha, the brilliant Martha. I should say, not my lovely Martha. Sorry, I'm talking about my daughter there. Martha. My publisher, Martha, the great Martha Ashby, I said, look, I've got this thing organised. On the week of publication, I said to Martha, I'm going to cycle around. I'm not going to do any more films of errant cab drivers or anything like that. I'm just going to cycle around with my book title, Murder on Line 1, on my cycle helmet. 2 days ago, my bike was stolen. So, yeah, seriously. So now I've just got the cycle helmet. So I'm going to have to walk around. Sorry, Martha. It's not working PR-wise. But the funny thing is about being 60, I was 11 when my mum, just to take us back to the start, gave me my first Agatha. And it was Hercule Poirot's Christmas. And I remember exactly where I was. And it's a book with a really amazing dedication. It's to her brother-in-law. And she says, my brother-in-law, James, you have said my murders are a bit too clean and tidy. So here's one with a lot of blood. And I read it, and it's now taken me, 49 years to write my own.
You have got an Agatha Christie-esque, Poirot-esque denouement to look forward to in this book, which I reread again today, and I really enjoyed. So you've got a lot to look forward to on the whole with this book. It's a fantastic achievement. I really loved reading it. I really loved chatting to you tonight. So thank you so much, and thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen. and we are going to get questions from the audience. But first, Mr. Jeremy Vine, isn't he brilliant?
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much.
What is the most satisfying thing about writing this book, but also the most frustrating thing?
I think what I've learned, I'm so conscious Martha's here, who's been across every word with me. When you put the final full stop on it, you have that thing, oh, I've done it, and you haven't. Because that's the moment of engagement with the professionals. And they're going, you have to be ready for them to say, right, we love this but. And the but is really, and you've had this as well, and the but is really important because they know what they're doing. And so this, with my second book, I have left it. You know when you build a new bed or an IKEA wardrobe, you don't tighten all the screws until you've got them all in place. So I've given Martha a manuscript with the screws untightened. And I think the danger of the final full stop is, and thinking that's it, and it's really not. But this feels like this is it, where you've actually, then it's there, it's real, you're real, I think. So we're all real. This is the most satisfying moment, honestly.
Lovely. Perfect. Remember when I told you about there was lots of changes to my first novel, and I was just absolutely gutted. I was so surprised that I'd have to change so much about it, but it's my first novel. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And you said, you know, the best thing to do is just to do what the editor says. Whatever you do, don't kick off and then do what they say anyway. And I was like, that's exactly what I've just done. I literally had emailed my lovely editor, Hannah, and I was like, you've ruined Christmas, because it was all the feedback in early December. And then I was like, sorry, you're right. Yeah, I'll get to work. I'll get it back to you by the end of January. So embarrassing.
Because I remember so talking to Sarah about her first book when you said, I can't believe it. I had a murmuration on page 50 and it's gone. And they'd taken and I said, I know, I've just heard the audiobook. There's definitely a murmuration in it. And you said,
my God.
But it's gone. A murmuration has gone.
Yeah, if
that's
there's been a
serious crime.
Oh, don't get me started on the audio. I get to the audiobook and then I want to go back in and edit again because I'm like, this is driving me mad. This isn't right. This needs tweaking. Any more, please, for Jeremy? Any more questions? Joe is ready. Oh, here we go, lovely lady. Sorry, lovely lady.
Hi.
Hi.
Do you plan the whole thing before you start writing? Do you have a really detailed plan? You know how it's going to start, middle, end, or does it evolve as you go?
I always feel like such an imposter answering questions because this is my first whodunit. So, but from my own experience, I would say that I love the idea. I think we all love the idea that you take 100 post-it notes and you take 5 days and you put them on a wall and that's the book, and then you just write the book. In fact, life being as it is, you will have better ideas along the way. So you really want just a very simple outline. And then gradually as you go through, you'll find you've got so many more ideas that go into it. I think you probably know where you want to end up. And you want to know who the villain is and how you're going to introduce them. And the other thing that's really interesting is how sophisticated readers are and viewers of TV shows, in that a tiny thing will alert them. I mean, Agatha, it was a false beard. You know, literally, you could tell that character's got a false beard, therefore he's the murderer. People are so switched on now. So you have to really, I think, set up red herrings, set up parallel plots, try to distract a little bit from the perpetrator, and keep it quite fluid, I would say. Are you writing yourself?
No.
I don't believe
Just reading.
you. Oh, well, brilliant. Reading's good.
Don't do it, honestly. It's a nightmare. Any more for any more?
I haven't written any books, but I imagine writing the first one was a steep learning curve, and I was wondering what things you did differently when writing the second book, having that experience of writing the first book.
What a great question. So I've written books before, but memoir, BBC memoir, and I wrote a kind of literary book about a painting I was obsessed with, and it was partly the wonderful failure of that book to sell any copies that made me think you can't just write about the thing you're most passionate about. You need to write about where everyone's at, and where they're at right now is Agatha and whodunits and all that. So that's what took me onto this. Yeah, the answer is that I think the joy of doing something with returning characters is that you're almost ready to roll from page one. That, you know, like Edward arrives on page one and we know him. So that feels great. The difficulty of the second one, and I see this, by the way, I've just read Richard Coles's latest one, and I've also just read a book by Neil Lancaster, which I really enjoyed, called When Shadows Fall, which I just happened upon. I saw him at a crime festival. And I realized that both of them, and Frank Gardner I'm reading at the moment, my BBC colleague, and I'm reading his, I think it might even be his 5th book. And in all these books, I've come in the middle of a chain. And I could see the author really struggling with backstory of how you tell the reader that there's a certain chain of events that have got our characters here. I can't go into details because I don't want to do loads of spoilers and you haven't got time. But in 3 or 4 sentences, here it is. So with Frank's one, it is, you know, he remembered last year when he walked into a room and there was a poison gas and he nearly died and everyone else did and now he's fine. And it was some amazing summary of a whole book. And I thought, I've just gone through the same thing myself of trying to work. So the upside is the characters are absolutely there, like Airfix models. They're there, they're ready to fly. The downside is you have got to fill in the backstory, I would say. I realize this is what I'm learning. Right, publisher, Martha? Okay, checking everything with Martha Ashby. And Liz, if she's here.
Any more questions for Jeremy?
Oh, my colleague Harriet at the back, who works on Channel 5, was up at 4:30 this morning, but still
she's like,
came.
can I have tomorrow off because I've come tonight?
She didn't
If
even,
I would
didn't
if
even
I
tell
were
me they
you.
were coming. It's so lovely.
Hi, sorry, I'm going to have to sort of half stand. I hope it's okay. It's sort of about the book, but also about you and journalism. Edward's a journalist as well, so I feel like it's allowed. But just because you were talking about the fact that, obviously, you know, you're a radio host and a television host, but you were talking about, you know, digital and how you think it's taking over. I just wanted to ask you, as people who work, you know, with you on the television, what kind of lifespan do you feel like radio and TV have as sort of mediums for people to receive their news? Is it something that you're worried about, or do you think that you and Edward will be hosting radio shows forever?
Oh, as always, the best question from a Channel 5 producer. So the thing that's joyous about our show on Channel 5, I'm looking at Sara over here as well, is the generational divide between me, age 59 and a half, and Harriet and co, who are 25, 24. 24! And you are they're immersed. I know, imagine. Can you imagine? So they're immersed in the digital world. So for me, for example, hilarious thing happened the other day. We were doing something about the army why don't we bring in conscription? It's like we do the same 7 stories every day. Why don't we bring in conscription so young people understand what life's about? And because Ukraine, etc. And I said, there's a great sketch, a Monty Python sketch, where the guy is shouting at all these young people on the parade ground, and they're obviously kind of not up for it, and they keep saying, do you mind, I've got a bit of a sniffle, do you mind if I go back and blow my, you know, and that sort of thing. And he dismisses them all. And I said to, it was Sophia or Harriet, let's cut that out, let's do that, and I'll play it. And when it plays on the air, I think it was Connor actually, when it plays on the air, the punchline is being taken off the end. And I say, can anyone explain to me why, I think I went to Connor and said, can you explain to me why you cut the Monty Python thing with the punchline off the end? And they said, well, I didn't think any of it was funny. And I thought, God, the divide. So I've just explained working on the Coventry Evening Telegraph. I mean, to Harriet, manual typewriters, 3-ply carbon paper, that the new technology they had in Coventry, Harriet, was that you would roll up the paper and you put it in a plastic tube, and there was a suction thing that sucked it across the building. The typesetters then took it out the end and laid out.
Young woman at the front is like,
it's like I'm talking about. I started using the phrase "in the olden days" to mean things we were doing 3 years ago. So, in the answer to your question, I do. AI is. I now mustn't miss the next big one because I keep thinking things are going to be nothing and then they're massive. I thought about the internet, everything, internet banking, buying shoes online, never going to happen. Have a look.
Penny farthings.
Yeah, penny farthings.
Huge. Who saw that coming?
So I'm going big into AI. I actually think, funnily enough, we should have an AI newsreader on our show. What do you think? Where we just have a 5-minute thing where we have a physical AI newsreader. and we just see whether the viewers enjoy the person, and then I can murder them. But yeah, the digital. Okay, can I tell my story about the digital world? Is it too rude? I went to. I had a pain. I had a private pain, and I I decided to diagnose myself, and I worked out it was something called primary ureteric calculus with possible retroperitoneal seminoma.
Dear.
That required a 3-hour operation. And I was certain of the diagnosis, so there's no question about it. So I then messaged my doctor, and I say, I have looked into this. I can tell you the symptoms, pain in a private area. And I've been through, it's, you know, if I ignore these symptoms, it says on the internet, death could result. So obviously it's urgent. And I know I've got primary ureteric calculus with possible periretroperitoneal seminoma. And I require a 3-hour operation. Could you check me in? And she said that's not. She emailed back. In fairness, I've still got the email. She said, "No, that's not the way we work." And I would need to see you. And I said, "Okay, so if you must." So I book in to see this lovely doctor, Dr. Deirdre O'Gallagher. And then a week later, I have to send her this email apologising. I said, "I do apologise. I think I may have wasted your time. The pain was caused by. It was January, and it was caused by a set of underpants that were too small." And that I was wearing. And that is why the symptoms mysteriously eased at night. And I do apologise for having wasted time. And that's digital, isn't it? Where we all become an expert in our own condition. I mean, I had the other night, you know, about a year ago, I had a Google alert on my name. God only knows why. You know, Rachel's asleep, the lights are off, my phone goes, you've been mentioned on... I said, Rachel says, what is it? I said, oh, hang on, I've been mentioned on the internet. So I've turned it off now. But anyway, it said it was a website called Resistance is Useless. It's posted a picture of me, and it's a poll. And it is Jeremy Vine, A, a tosser, B, a massive tosser, C, an Olympic-sized tosser, or D, all of the above? And I think, shit. I said, hang on, I've got to find what's going on. Rachel's sort of like, can't you tell? I said, no, I've got to find out how the voting's going. But the only way I can find out how I've got to vote myself. So I think classic BBC guy, I'll go down the middle. So I vote massive tosser. I get through to the next page. I find there's only been one vote, and it's me. And I just think you can take this digital world and stick it.
I think that is a perfect place to end. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.